Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to another edition of #AskRobCo. Hope you're all well. Hope you've had a good week. Hope you're enjoying lockdown 2.0 as much as you can enjoy such a thing. Super excited for our very special guest today. To give a little bit of intro before we fully introduce Jay Allen, motivational speaker, inspirational speaker, business speaker, a teller of emotional stories, and the true north. That's the kind of piece that I'm really looking forward to today. I'm personally a very emotional person. I love emotional stories. Hopefully you're going to capture my heart and mind as well with one of your stories, Jay. So welcome to the show. Welcome to #AskRobCo. Thank you for joining us.
Rob, delighted to be here. Thank you very much, my friend.
So for those of you listening, you know the format. Questions on the right-hand side, you type them in, we will give you the answers. Thank you for joining. Anyone new, this is your platform, your show. We're just here to give a bit of added value, a bit of content, a bit of happiness, a bit of positivity, a bit of a good vibe, so you stay home this weekend with a good outlook and hopefully take something on board that will help you in your professional development, professional growth, in your life, or whatever you're doing. I'm going to throw it to you, Jay. Tell us a bit about yourself, your life, your story, your journey, where you come from, how you've evolved to be the person that you are today, and then we'll go into a bit more detail about what you're doing, TrueNORTH, and the impact that you want to have on society, the world, and touch on a bit of the mental health stuff as well.
Ideal, Rob. Thank you very much for having me. So, in a nutshell, Jay Allen, born in just outside Nottingham, in Nottinghamshire, went through the usual school education system, just enough qualifications, O-levels, old enough to remember O-levels rather than GCSEs, but just enough qualifications to go into senior education, into sixth form, just enough A-levels to be able to get into university, with the hope that one day I might work out as to what it was that I wanted to be. I qualified as a social worker. I got a first in sociology, psychology, and qualified into Nottingham, into the social work scene, only to realise that I actually hated social work. I loved the concept of being able to help people. I just didn't like all of the red tape and bureaucracy that prevented you from really doing any real good. So I started to look around for another career, something to do off the back of that, whilst all my friends who'd gone to college but hadn't gone to uni had seen the newspaper article, "The Army needs you," in order to go to the Falklands. So they'd all joined the British Army, and by the time I was getting disillusioned 3 or 4 years later with my job, they'd come back from the army with stories and cash and scars and girlfriends and none of the stuff that I had in social work, and decided, do you know what? In for a penny, in for a pound. Let's see what it's all about. I'll go and do 3 years for Queen and Country, and signed on the dotted line. I think I was somewhat biased by the training officer, because he looked at my social work qualifications and he said, we don't need any social workers. We already know we're all mad. He said, but if you're one of those carey sort, why don't you go and join the medical corps? We'll pay for you to go back to university and transfer to medicine. And I accepted the offer, went back to university and qualified as a paramedic, on the understanding that I'd have to do a minimum of 4 years instead of 3 in order to be able to pay for that additional qualification and training. Joined the army, fell in love with it within about 6 or 7 months, and decided I was going to make it my career. Fast forward 12 years later, on an accelerated promotion scheme, doing well, enjoying life in all of the exciting places like Northern Ireland before the peace treaty, the first Gulf War, 3 Christmases on the hills of Mount Igman in Bosnia, Sarajevo, across the border into Kosovo, little bit of sunshine in places like East Timor and Sierra Leone and the refugee camps, and then to the second Gulf War, which is where I ended up needing a medic as opposed to being a medic. I was involved in quite a serious accident, laying on the ground, screaming out for help, morphine in one arm and adrenaline pumping around the system. And then 2 medics start running towards you and they're busy shouting to each other, going, no way, it's the SOT major, it's one of ours. And me looking at these guys thinking, do you know what? I trained those before we deployed. I wonder if they were best in class. And before you know it, I'd passed out. I was transferred out of theatre back to Germany to be stabilised initially, and then back into the UK to Headley Courts to be able to start going through my rehab. The intent was that if I worked hard at rehabilitation, that there was a good chance that whilst I was probably never going to deploy again, my injuries determined that I was unlikely to be a field soldier anymore, that because of my qualifications and the fact that prior to going out to the Second Gulf, I've been the training officer, that there was a good chance I was going to be able to stay on what's called an admin post and be able to continue to see out my career teaching others.
Sorry to interrupt, what were the extent of the injuries, just so we understand?
Sure, I broke my back, my hip and my left leg. So my lowest part of my back has been fused together. I've got a titanium pin from my hip to my knee, and then I've got 13 pins in my lower leg and my foot.
Wow.
It was a proper injury rather than a plaster.
Sounds like.
Whilst I was in Headley Court and learning, and don't get me wrong, physiotherapy, that's a career to be in. You save people's lives in physiotherapy. People were wheeled-in broken and came out walking again. It was just phenomenal. And whilst I was really keen on being able to recover physically, I had no correlation, even to this day. Really, it still amazes me as to the impact mental health has on physical well-being. And I started to have flashbacks. I started to have nightmares and refreshed memories, PTSD as it's now called. I often say I was diagnosed with it before it became fashionable. I started to have flashbacks of the accident, of the injury, and couldn't start to understand really as to why it was that I'd lost 3 really good friends on that day, and I was the 4th injured. I was the only of the 4 of us to survive, and I couldn't quite work out as to why I'd been so unfortunate as to live when they'd been so fortunate enough to die.
Wow.
I was surrounded by other people that had lost limbs and severe injury, and PTSD kicked in. I got it really, really bad. I ended up being sectioned under the Mental Health Act for my own protection. And I didn't realise that regardless of how much physiotherapy I was having, my physical injuries were getting worse because my mentality wasn't in the right place. To the extent that the physio went back to the surgeon and said, I think you need to rescan. There's clearly a problem with the recovery that he's going through. You've missed something because we're doing all the physio and it's physically getting worse. And it took them 7 or 8 months to be able to establish that perhaps we needed to stop with the physical rehabilitation and trying to fix the mental rehabilitation, as opposed to just continuing to fill me with drugs, which is what the plan was at the time 20 years ago when this happened. And it wasn't until they were able to fix the mentality that all of a sudden, within weeks almost of this being fixed, my physicality caught back up again, and I was recovering far quicker.
Talk us through that process, because I think it's really, really important. 1, for the listeners, and 2, you know, a week or 2 ago was Mental Health Week and Day, and what does that process actually look like, from going from having the correlation of the physical and the mental being joined up so that actually you start seeing an improvement? Talk us through that briefly if you can.
Yeah, sure. It was most interesting because, like I say, I was diagnosed with this back in the very early stages of 2000, well before it was as well documented and understood as it is these days. And in those days, it was very much a case of medications to try and numb out whatever's causing the problem in order that you could physically recover, so you had the physical strength to be able to have that stiff upper lip that we're all taught to have in the military. And it was only when we actually separated the two and said, let's remove the medication, or slowly wean him off the medication and remove the medication, and allow him to go into that place of mental discomfort, and then work with NLP, timeline therapy, a little bit of aromatherapy at times, and some hypnotherapy, in order to be able to help unlock and unpick the cause of the problem, refix that by trying to reattribute fear and replace it with something along the lines of success and overcome, being able to see yourself as a survivor as opposed to a victim, and then slowly allowing the physicalities to be able to be reintroduced to it, and actually separate the two, change the mentality, and then add to it that you can leave this hospital in two ways, either the way that you came in or with a completely different mindset and abilities to be able to deal with it.
So that was basically, going back to what you said previously, flipping your mindset to, why am I so unlucky to be the survivor, to how comes I'm so lucky to be alive and the opportunity that's ahead of me.
Massively. It was very much a case of being able to wake up. I mean, I remember at the worst case scenario, simply waking up and crying because I was awake. Not because I was in any physical pain, just because I was there and I didn't want to be there anymore, and I didn't want to be in the body that I was in. And yet waking up one day and being able to say, instead of saying, why is this happening to me, simply shortening the sentence and saying, so why is this happening? Full stop. And by removing the to me from it, I could then make a decision as to how I wanted to feel about the fact that it was happening. And you start to take ownership. And as soon as you start to take ownership, and there are people around you to be able to support you to be able to do that, then everything changes, because instead of seeing it as a challenge, you see it as a choice.
So talk about the next part of your journey.
Sure.
Obviously, it does go more positive, and you do recover physically and mentally, and I think it's important to address the two, irrespective of understanding that the correlation is so aligned. They both still need to be looked after, because to be physically strong and mentally weak, or mentally strong and physically weak, you know, you do need to look after both sides of physical and mental health to reap the benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And it got to the stage where my mentality had got to a glass ceiling, because I wasn't doing the physicality, and the body needs that endorphin rush on a regular basis just to be able to continue to feed that increase in abilities to be able to attack all of the things that are perhaps going wrong in our lives. So some form of physicality, some physical exercise at whatever level we're capable of doing, starts to feed the electrodes that allow us to be able to continue to move forward. So rather than a physical injury where they anticipated I was going to be in hospital for about 5 or 6 months, I ended up leaving hospital 20 months after I was admitted. And I knew full well that regardless of my physicality, that there was no way I was going to be allowed to be able to stay in the military with both a physical and a mental illness. And so I knew long before the paperwork came through to say I'd been promoted to the rank of Mr. That I knew that was coming. It wasn't a blow to me, although I was most disappointed to have lost my career before the end, as it were. The next bit.
So when did you leave hospital? How long ago was that? Just so we have some context here.
Beginning of 2003.
Fine. So we're now 17 years, or nearly 18 from that moment.
Yeah.
What's happened since?
So very briefly then, I found it very, very difficult to get a job when I first got out, not because of my physicality, but because I believed in telling the truth. And when people said, we notice on your CV that it said you stopped being a physical soldier 2 years ago, where have you been for the last 2 years? I talked about being in hospital with both a physical and a mental illness, thinking that it was right to be honest and transparent with people. And in those days, again, I think life's moved on, and we understand this a lot more than we did then. But they saw me as a potential long-term sickness absence risk, as opposed to a recovering soldier that's now ready to be able to give back to society. And it took me about 10 months to be able to get a job. But I was fortunate. I continued to drive forward and knew and believed that somebody somewhere would see something beyond the blip, the little scar that was on my medical record, as it were. I managed to facilitate a meeting with Sir Ken Morrison from Morrison's, and that's a whole different story in itself, but perhaps one for a different day. But I managed to facilitate a meeting with Sir Ken Morrison whilst he was still the chairman of the board for Morrison's Supermarket, and 6 days later was successfully interviewed to be his national training director. to stand in for a year of maternity leave for Charlotte, who was just about to go off and have her third baby. And I was awarded with the role. I was told, well, if you're a sergeant major in the army, this will be a cinch. The only other job description I had was don't break it. And I looked after the training development of Morrison's and their 47,000 staff with a 17.8 million budget and a job description that said you'll work it out. And ironically, the rest is pretty much history. You can dine off having worked at Morrison's for a long, long time without people ever asking as to your mental health background.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, that within itself, I would love to hear that full story. It sounds fascinating. A few questions on some of the stuff you've already said. So let's go back pre Army days, and you mentioned that you'd gone into social care or followed that path through university, and you were described as being someone that cared. So those two things don't happen by chance. So maybe we can go a bit deeper into that. First and foremost, someone doesn't choose to go down a social care path if something within them doesn't want to help the wider society or the greater good. And then someone doesn't turn around to you and say that in an interview if they don't believe that that's what you're giving forward. So where did that develop from? Is it parenting? Is it growing up? Is there something that happened in your life? Where did that come from?
Do you know, Rob, in all the interviews I've ever had, that's the first time I've ever been asked it, and I'm so delighted, because even asking the question, you've taken me back to when I was 5 years old. I was in my first ever reception class in Intake Farm School in Mansfield, and we were told that the following day, instead of going into normal lessons, that we were going to turn up in fancy dress as opposed to in school uniform. We used to have little hats and shorts and long socks in those days. But the following day, we were going to turn up in fancy dress, and we were going to do a sponsored walk of 10 times around the playing field to raise money for children. In those days, it was raising money for Ethiopia, to raise money for children who were far less fortunate than that of ourselves. And I went home and I asked lots of questions of my parents with regards to, well, which town is Ethiopia in? And can we go there at the weekends to go and see these children? And to learn all of the fact that, you know, we are so privileged in British society with what we have available to us compared to so many other children around the world, that I turned up on that day and we were supposed to do 10 laps around the playing field and then come in. It was going to take about an hour, and then it was back to lessons as normal, but you could stay in fancy dress. And I remember refusing to come in and saying, but lots of people have sponsored me per lap, and if I continue to do more laps, I can raise more money. And I got a certificate from the school for having stayed and walked around that playing field on my own for 7 hours that day, from 8 till 3, to raise money for kids in Ethiopia. And it set me apart. It told me that this was my calling. And I'm really proud to say that since that day when I was 5, that there's never been a year where I haven't not just contributed to charity, but done a charitable event. And to date, I'm really proud to say that so far in my life, have raised £986,000 for various charities since then.
Amazing. So what are we going to do to take it to 1 million, and how are we going to celebrate that?
Well, I've decided that 1 million is simply another milestone. I've made it now my life's career to be able to raise £10 million. I'm now an ambassador for the Armed Forces charity Combat Stress, who are the sister company or sister charity, if you like, to Help for Heroes, the far more better and well known of the two charities. And whilst Help for Heroes looks after the incredible work that they do for physically disabled and physically damaged soldiers, service and airmen, Combat Stress is a lot longer in the tooth, but perhaps less well known, and looks after the mental anguish of both soldiers and their families and the trauma of war, which is obviously something I've been through and suffered, and now thankful and grateful to have come out the other side and able to be able to help other people.
For sure you're going to hit 1, for sure you're going to hit 10. I'd like to be there at 10, and I'd like to be there at 100 million when you reach that as well. I'm pretty convinced about that. With everything you said and where we are today with COVID, and I know it's something you talk about, it's on your website, etc. The perspective and the relative challenge that is being faced today, and your journey, having been lying on the floor, unconscious, then in a hospital for 20 months, would I be harsh or incorrect in saying that something like COVID for you is so manageable mentally, because when you've been on the floor wounded and you've then been unconscious and then been hospitalized for 20 months, putting that perspective into play has put you in a different space?
Yeah, massively. I couldn't agree with you anymore. But to take that and push it back to our viewers, and to be able to say that regardless of how difficult COVID has been this year for many people, I'm not sure that there's been anyone that hasn't been in some way impacted either directly or indirectly by this incredible pandemic that's spread the world. So far, you can look back on your life and you can list a whole number of different reasons and things and situations that have been tough, that have had challenges, that sometimes haven't gone the way that you'd have wanted. And the good news is that I can now sit here in front of you and say, I'm almost 48 years old and I've got 48 years of experience of getting by.
Looking good for 48.
God bless you, thank you very much. But I've got 48 years of experience of getting through this and facing it and achieving. And if we can always put things back into perspective as opposed to see it as the woe is me. Let me give you one quick example, if I may, Rob. When was the last time that you took a flight?
About 5 weeks, 6 weeks ago.
Whenever you sit in the aeroplane and you're on the runway and it starts to hurtle forwards towards taking off, as it takes off, the nose picks up, we sit into the backs of our seats, we look up, and we start to think about, with excitement and in vigor, the future that is of where it is that we're heading to. And yet on the way down, as the nose is pointing back towards the runway and we're doing our final descent, we start to lean forward a little and we start to think about the immediacy of what's going to happen next. First of all, we're praying that it's a good pilot and we have a good landing. And then we're thinking about, have all the bills been paid? And where did I park the car? And have I got the ticket? And all of the immediacy of now. And it's exactly the same with COVID. Something's come along that's knocked us off the rails. It's determined that we haven't, any of us, had the year that we'd first planned for, and New Year's Eve when we raised our glasses and said, Happy New Year. 2020 just hasn't been that year. And yet the problem is that so many people have suddenly slumped and they've turned their head downwards and they've started to look to the immediacy of right here and right now. And all we've got to do is we've got to change our physicality. Simply sit back up again and lift our head and shoulders and say, do you know what? We've got through 2020. I wonder what 2021's got in store for us and how are we going to embrace it? And we've only got to think about as if we were going back on holiday again. And all of a sudden that excitement releases, the endorphins come back in again, and we've got a far better mood and attitudes towards being able to attack whatever it is that's thrown at us.
Absolutely, agree with you 100%. Got to have a positive outlook. 2021 will be a great year, but we don't have to wait for it to start. You can start now and have that positive outlook. Before we go into TrueNORTH, or as I said previously, the North Star, and the sun's screaming through trying to do something here. Before we talk about that and the impact that you're looking to have on the world over and beyond what we've just discussed, just want to join a few dots together with some areas of questions that have come in and piece the pieces. So I continuously discuss on this show Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, because it is just such a powerful book, and you know, the basics of when you've got a purpose in life and you understand with clarity what that purpose is and that meaning, then you understand what you're living for, and it enables you to get through whatever the cruelest of challenges that you may face in life. Having heard your story and your understanding at the age of 5, the challenges you faced, and then you've had the situation where you've been physically impeded, hospitalized, faced the mental challenge. At what point did you either lose the purpose and the meaning of your life, not understand the purpose and the meaning of your life, when you so clearly understood it from the age of 5 to spend 7 hours walking around the playground? Can you explain to us what happened there?
Rob, I can't tell you as to how much I'm enjoying this interview, because like I say, of all the questions I've ever been asked, all of these are original and just get me back into that place. So thank you. I think, to be honest with you, it comes back to that physicality and that mentality and the battle between the two. That for 12 years, just over 12 years and a month, I believed in the military. I was pretty much invincible. You know, we go through this thing in basic training that says, breaketh the boy to maketh the man. Take away from him what he believes he is and turn him into what he's capable of. And as a result, you join a regiment where you eat together, sleep together, breathe together, feed together, fight together, die together, where, you know, you genuinely believe that everyone within this team is there to support you, and you're there to support them, and collectively we'll get through anything together. I certainly know the second tour of Bosnia, I volunteered to go back as opposed to waited to be told and conscripted to it, on the basis that all my friends were going, and I was fearful of whichever medic was going to be sent in my replacement, were they going to be as good as me and are as dedicated to the team that I was. So we have this group think of being able to do things together. And yet the moment I was broken, the moment my physicality was broken, it broke my mindset as well. It completely wiped me off the board so much that I'd lost the abilities to think positively because my physicality wasn't in a place of positivity. And it wasn't until I realized and got to complete rock bottom, like I say, when you cry simply because you're awake, that you start to realize that unless you do some things to change your mentality, your physicality is not going to follow suit.
Yeah, amazing. As you said, you know, one, it's very personal. Two, it's super emotional. So it obviously touches all of us and everyone listening. At the same time, it's just such a wonderfully positive example of having experienced something that literally broke you mentally and physically, and at the same time allowed you to rebuild yourself to be in such a wonderful place that you're in, and understand that you have the both physical and mental capacity to deal with whatever the world throws at you. Last few minutes, share with us TrueNORTH and the impact that you're looking to have on the world and the greater wider society.
Sure, thanks very much for the opportunity. So TrueNORTH was born on the 13th of May 2014. I want to quickly take you on a journey again. Rob, you're getting on the plane this time, but instead of just flying out to wherever it was that you went 5 weeks ago, this time you've opted that you're going to fly out towards the North Pole, ready to be able to meet your personal attributes and goals of a lifetime to trek to the North Pole. And you've done all of the training, you've bought all the equipment, you've got a team of people around you, and you're going to fly to the outer hemisphere and then set off on the 712-mile trek to the North Pole. And sadly, the chances are you're never going to get there, because you've set out and you're holding the compass in your hand, and although you're religiously following the end, you're following magnetic north. You've got no recollection of the fact that magnetic north is 11 degrees to the to the west of TrueNORTH, the North Pole. It's pulled off course by the magnetic impulses in the northern hemisphere. And if you didn't know that, you would religiously follow the N, and yet you'd probably get to Scandinavia before you found that you were going off course. And it's exactly the same in business and in life. We set out with a goal and a purpose and something that we want to go out and achieve. And then we get our head down and we trudge in the snow and we push forward on a day-to-day basis, believing that we're heading in the right course. And yet statistics show that only 1% of people that set up in business ever smash the goals that they first set out to achieve. And that's because we get drawn off course. Those little SOS signals, that shiny object syndrome, that 1 degree at a time pulls us towards magnetic north as opposed to true north. So what we've set about is I've spent 4 years researching what causes businesses to fail. I was significantly impacted in my own business as a supplier to Woolworths in 2008 when Woolworths went under. At the time of going under, they owed me £224,000, and I lost it in the 6-minute phone call I got from Deloitte to tell me that we wouldn't get paid. And I determined that if we were ever going to be in business continually, I needed to understand as to what caused us failure. One, how did we leave ourselves so exposed? And two, how do you get to a £3 billion a year company and then go broke? So we spent 4 years, a team of 9 data analysts, looking at what causes businesses to fail. And we identified 3 flaws. We then surveyed over 115,000 SME businesses to find out as to at what stage of development does a business have to be at before those flaws become prevalent. And then we've created a program called the Adazero programs to determine how do you overcome the flaws and what does it do for you and your business. And since we've been running this program in 2017, we've had 8 of our clients as National Entrepreneur of the Year award winners. And we've had 41 people smash the £1 million turnover mark. So our quest for the world is, one, we want to be able to take the Adazero programs to 1 million business owners. Now, we set this target before COVID, and at the time, if we could help 1 million business owners to add a zeros to the personal disposable income of the business owner, it would automatically mean that they would have taken on enough staff that we could have helped eradicate unemployment in the UK. However, we probably need to revise that on the basis that we're now being told that there's going to be 2 to 3 million more people unemployed, that I've got a bigger quest to be able to do so. But the other thing in the business is that we've made it and written it into our memorandum to continue to recognise the support that I got from combat stress when I first left the military, that we're going to build a veterans retreat for soldiers suffering with PTSD in order that they can go on holiday with the family in a safe environment to be able to do so, because I know the impact of being able to go back to nature and to stop as opposed to continually being in respite did for me in my recovery.
Wow. Jay, I'm absolutely blown away. We're going to have a proper catch up, Jay. We've got far too much to talk about. Hopefully Dan can arrange that. What do you want to leave the listeners with to give them a bit of happiness and positivity, something really strong to go away with at the weekend? What's the punchline you want to give to them?
Sure. I've got 3 rules that I live my life by, and if I can share 3 of them very quickly with you, then I promise you it will have a bigger impact than perhaps anything else that you've done over the last 11 months of 2020. First of all, Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again and again and again, and still expecting a different set of results. We've got to be willing to do something different if we want a different set of results. The second of the 2 rules is we don't yet know what we don't know. Be willing to be open to learn new things. Don't ever turn around and say, tried that, doesn't work. Because ironically, you haven't tried it now, and you haven't tried it with the same fortitude that I'm now advising you and recommending to you. And thirdly, and probably the most profound but the most important, your future will ultimately be determined by the quality of question you learn to ask of yourself. If you want a different future, learn to ask a better question.
Jay, amazing. It's been absolutely fascinating speaking with you. Absolute pleasure, absolute joy. Promise me that we'll carry on communicating, because too much good coming out of you for me not to want to hear even more of that and share that goodness. Thank you everyone for listening, watching, rewatching, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, all of the platforms. Great having you, great questions. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday. The true star, North Star is shining through as I speak. We'll see you all again. Hashtag askrobco every Friday, 1 p.m. Everyone be safe, take care. And thank you all. Thanks, Jay. That was amazing. Take care, everyone.